Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Blurred Lines, Crime, Conspiracy, and the Truth Behind the Gossip. I want to start this episode by saying I appreciate each and every one of you. Last week's episode got so many listens and downloads. I cannot thank you guys enough. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. We talked about Astroworld. So if you guys are interested in the Astroworld tragedy, or you're a little late to the game, not too late, but a little late to the game in watching the documentary over on Netflix, go and check it out. I promise you won't be disappointed. Today, we are talking about another Netflix documentary because I've actually been watching a lot of them, catching up, doing all that. So these are cases that have been on my mind for a little bit. So that's why we did the Astroworld. That's why today we are talking about the murder of Jason Corbett. Of course, this is a Netflix documentary, A Deadly American Marriage. I'm sure you guys have seen it. If you haven't, you might be living under a rock. But we are titling today's episode The Brick, the Bat, and the Lie. The Killing of Jason Corbett. Now, if you guys have not watched the documentary, I highly recommend you guys go watch it. It's really, really interesting, especially if you've never heard of this case. I have heard of this case. I remember watching I think it was like a 48 hours documentary or one of those CBS produced shows about it a while back. And so that's what I remember it from. But I definitely recommend that. And I also am going to leave in the show notes down below a couple of documentaries over on YouTube that are really insightful and that I watched to research this case as well, because I just think that there is some portions that Netflix does leave out, and I don't think that's intentional because this happens a lot. I don't think it's intentional that they leave those portions out. I just feel like there's just so much to actually go over and discuss, and some things are just left out. That's just how I feel it is. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts, of course, as always. If you guys ever have any kind of case recommendations or want me to shout you out or anything like that, you guys can send me an email. It's ashtootrippy@gmail.com, or you can DM me on any of my social media platforms, and I try to get back to you as soon as I can. But be patient with me. Sometimes I procrastinate, okay? All right. Now, today we're going to be, again, as I stated, we're going to be diving deep into this case of Jason Corbett. Not only does this happen in the United States, but being as Jason was a native to Ireland, this also affected Ireland as well. This is a story about love, loss, and a brutal killing that has sparked endless questions. Was it self-defense or was it a premeditated murder? Buckle up for a chilling tale that unravels the deadly relationship between Jason Corbett and Molly Martens. And again, I stated a majority of this does come from the Netflix new documentary, A Deadly American Marriage. You can watch it now on Netflix. And again, I am going to be also giving you guys some reference points that I used for this podcast resources as well. All right, the fairy tale beginning. Let's start from the beginning, okay? Jason Corbett, a successful businessman from Limerick, Ireland, had everything until life took a cruel turn. In 2006, his wife, Margaret, who they call Megs Fitzpatrick, tragically died of an asthma attack, leaving Jason a widower at just 30 years old. Alone, grieving, and left with two young children, Jack and Sarah, he was just trying to survive. That's when Molly Martens entered the picture. Molly was a 25-year-old American from Knoxville, Tennessee. She arrived in Ireland in 2008 to work as an au pair, hired to care for Jason's children. And pretty soon, the working relationship turned into a romantic one. Jason and Molly fell in love, and at least that's what it looked like from the outside. Eventually, they got engaged, and Jason moved his job to the United States so they could start a new life together, bringing Jack and Sarah. They ended up moving to North Carolina. They got married in front of friends and family, but that honeymoon phase, Did it last? So let's talk a little bit about a couple of things here. So I want to let you guys know that Molly was not the first au pair that Jason had tried to hire. He had been through a couple of other au pairs that were from different countries, and it's not that they didn't not work, is what was going on as told by Jason's sister is he was just using au pairs for a few weeks at a time when he felt like he needed help. It wasn't something that he ever anticipated it to be long term. That was my understanding when they talk with his sister about this whole scenario, is there was never any permanent plan to have an au pair all the time. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And it's also very interesting that shortly after she had arrived to become this au pair, she very quickly seduces Jason, in my opinion, and continues to move forward. Now, we will hear a little bit about Molly's background here, but let's talk about the marriage a little bit before that, okay? So the marriage is fractured. What happens next depends on who you ask. Molly says the marriage quickly turned abusive, that Jason was controlling, violent even, that they fought often and she feared for her safety. But friends and families on Jason's side, they saw a very different man, devoted to his kids and mourning his late wife and trying to build a life. Molly's saying one thing, his family knows another of him because, again, they're his family. Despite growing tension, the couple stayed together. Then came the night of August 2nd, 2015. Jason Corbett would never walk out of the house again. Molly and her father, Tom Martens, a retired FBI agent, would later claim it was self-defense, that Jason attacked Molly, that Tom heard the commotion and rushed in to protect his daughter. Armed with an aluminum baseball bat, that Molly grabbed a brick from the nightstand and fought back. That's their version. But what really happened? Now, before we get a little bit more into the evidence of stuff, I want to preface this by saying that if you guys are wondering why Tom Martens, Molly's father, was there, because they don't live in North Carolina. Before you guys start asking, basically, so Tom was in North Carolina that evening to visit, apparently. That's why a lot of the questions in this case are like, okay, why was he there? Why was he there to visit at that specific time? And there's just a lot. So we're going to keep going here. Now, the 911 call, we're going to talk a little bit about that right now. So the 911 call and blood on the walls. At 3 a.m., Tom Martens called 911. He sounded shaken. He's bleeding all over and I may have killed him, quote unquote. This was said by Tom Martens calling 911. When police arrived at the home in Walberg, North Carolina, they were met with what one investigator called one of the bloodiest crime scenes she'd ever seen, quote unquote. Blood on the walls, the ceiling, and the furniture. Jason Corbett's skull was crushed from at least a dozen separate blows. Now we're going to pause here because a dozen blows with a bat and a brick, it raises the question, was this really self-defense or something else? Because when you tell somebody like okay, somebody got beat up with a bat and a brick, and they're now saying it's self-defense. And this was in an upstairs bedroom, by the way. So the investigators also noticed a few strange details, like right away. The 911 call sounded staged. Paramedics on the scene thought Jason's body was too cold for the timeline Tom and Molly gave. And maybe most damning of all, neither Tom nor Molly had a scratch on them. And so that kind of paints a picture of a life or death, that's not really a life and death struggle that kind of gives. That kind of gives like attack, Now, Molly Martens, I want to kind of just preface this with everything, okay? So Molly Martens isn't a very big woman, and neither is her father. Her father's not he wasn't a very big man, not tall, not in any way. Jason was a bigger man. So I do feel like if there was any chance for them to not sustain any injuries, they definitely, in my opinion, attacked him while he was sleeping. Just saying. Just saying, you know. Now, at first, the police considered it might be a justifiable homicide. But as evidence began stacking up, so did their doubts. There was no signs of Jason being violent that night, no marks on Molly, no signs of him being out of control, and the children, they'd seen more than anyone realized. So during questioning, 10-year-old Jack at the time said that his father physically and verbally hurt my mom, quote unquote. That's what he said. But later, under different circumstances, both Jack and Sarah told a very different story. They said Molly told them to say that their father was never abusive, that Molly was the one lying. And here's where things take a turn, okay? Jason had told his family that he had planned to take the kids back to Ireland, that he wanted out of the marriage, and that Molly had become controlling, manipulative, and volatile. He'd even updated his will, naming his sister, not Molly, as the children's guardian. To prosecutors, this looked like a motive. So I want to kind of deep dive into that a little bit. So it said in those days prior to Jason being murdered is that he was looking up flights. There's even talk that he had already pulled out luggage to start packing for himself and the children. And even though the authorities never found like the bookings or anything like that, it was to even the children's knowledge that they would be going back to Ireland soon. So this was a huge motive for Molly because it shows that the only reason she was in this relationship, remember, she was an au pair. She went out to Ireland to au pair for Jason and the kids. So that was the motive in the beginning. Okay. Now, Molly had suffered from a loss of a pregnancy. Okay. So I do think that struck her really hard, and she had this yearning of wanting children, and this was her way of doing it, in my opinion, of course. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the backstory and some things here in a moment, but we are going to go over the first trial and the verdict of that. Okay. So in January 2016, Molly and Tom Martens were charged with second-degree murder. Their trial began in 2017, and the courtroom was electric with tension. The prosecution argued that this wasn't self-defense. It was a deliberate killing born out of rage and fear of losing control. They pointed to the injuries, the timeline, and the changing stories. The defense stuck to their version that Jason was abusive and Molly feared for her life, that her father acted in the heat of the moment to save his daughter. But here's the kicker. Neither Molly nor Tom took the stand in their own defense. Instead, their lawyers leaned hard on character witness accounts and Molly's claims of abuse. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on both counts. Molly and Tom were each sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison. Jason's family breathed a sigh of relief, but that story wasn't over. Okay? So there was an appeal, there was a Supreme Court, and this motion to overturn the verdict. Okay. Now, at first it was denied, but then they went higher, arguing jury misconduct, flawed evidence handling, and suppressed testimony. In March 2021, the North Carolina Supreme Court granted a new trial. And just like that, Molly and Tom Martens were out on bond. Now, prosecutors had to decide, go through another trial or offer a plea. Both children, now teens, had returned to Ireland and were preparing to testify, but emotionally it would take a toll. The defense prepared to once again claim abuse. They even hinted that Jason may have been responsible for his first wife's death, though no evidence ever supported that, and we'll get into that later as well. In a court hearing leading up to the plea, both Jack and Sarah delivered heartbreaking victim impact statements. They told the judge that Molly robbed them of their father and their childhood, that the woman who once cared for them had destroyed their family. They wanted the maximum penalty. But justice, well, it came in a different form. In 2024, Molly and Tom Martens took a plea deal. They admitted to voluntary manslaughter. Their new sentence was 51 to 70 months. But after credit for time already served, they would only serve 7 or 8 more months behind bars. To Jason's family, especially his sister Tracy, it was a gut punch. She had spent years fighting for justice and even wrote a book, My Brother Jason, which that book I really want to get to read. I think it would be a really good read, so it's on my list. Meanwhile, Molly told the documentary filmmakers that Jack and Sarah had been quote-unquote brainwashed, that they were tools of evil, repeating lies told by others. But those same children, now nearly adults, stand firm. Their memories of that night and the years before it are etched in their minds, and their pain is very real. So let's go over a couple of things. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Molly Martens and her background, because there's some really telling things in her background that make this a little bit more chilling in my opinion. So let's start off at the fact that when she was in college, she kept a picture by her bed. And she would tell her roommate that the picture by her bed was her sister that died of cancer. But she never had a sister, let alone a sister to die of cancer. A lot of people can say, because this is like with the whole Sherry Papini thing, which I'm going to be talking about over on my TikTok page, Ashtootrippy, so check it out. People do lie. Like, it's not unheard of for people to lie. People lie. Some people lie a little bit more than others, and some people find it more amusing than others. You know, like, I don't know, maybe they're just bored with who they are or not confident in who they are, so they do that, right? But to kill off a non-existent sister and then place a picture of just a stock image you found online by your bed and tell that story, that just gives that you want to be far more interesting than you actually are. You know, like, it doesn't give any kind of good feeling to want to be your friend and talk to you when somebody finds that out. I don't know, maybe that's just me. I don't know. Anyways, so that's not the only lie she told. There was actually a few other lies. So let me talk a little bit about before she went to Ireland. Now, you would think, you know, she's looking for an au pair job in Ireland, like she must not have much going on in America, you know, to be staying there. Well, actually she did. She had a fiance. She had a whole ass fiance in life that was in the States when she left to take this job in Ireland. So yeah, she had a fiance and they were together, and like I said, she had suffered a miscarriage of a child, and that kind of, you know, it hurt her naturally, you know, like she went through some grief stages and stuff. It seemed like she was finally getting a little bit better, and then she talks about this, and I mean, like, the fiance is like, okay, well, you want to try something new, you know, go right ahead, was fully supportive, thought that it would only be a few months or whatever. And then she like calls him and says, oh yeah, I'm not gonna go back. Yeah, I'm just not gonna go back. And at this time she was already, you know, romantically involved with Jason, and she still had a fiance back home in the States. Like, that's another level of like really disturbed and really like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, in my opinion, of course. And at this time she's already a little bit older, so I don't feel like the college thing, like it puts a bad taste in your mouth. But now that she's a little bit older and telling these lies, I don't know. So now she's with Jason, right? When they get married, they come back to the States to get married, and Jason's family is there, as well as his ex-wife. Like, his ex-wife's family is still very involved because, of course, those children are still like their grandchildren and stuff. Molly, during her wedding, one of her friends, because of course, you know, this is where everybody mingles and stuff and talks to each other and finds out a little bit about, you know, it's a marriage, you know, it's a wedding. And And so one of Molly's friends talks to Jason's sister and says, oh, it's just so wonderful, such a great love story that Molly was really good friends with Megs, the kid's mother, that passed away from an asthma attack, and she helped Jason out, and now they're getting married. That's just such a happy story. And Jason's sister looks at her like, Molly was the au pair. She wasn't even supposed to be there for that long. She never knew us before she became an au pair. And it's never said on how her friends react to this, but I would only assume that her friends are like, because the whole thing with this is that, like, since her ex-fiance knew about this, I'm almost certain that her friends were well aware of, like, lies that she would tell. And, like, why do people, like, brush lies off like that? I couldn't imagine just brushing a lie off and being like, wait, that don't make sense. Like, can you explain that? And, like, making a huge deal about it right then and there. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I don't know. So we've established that Molly does lie, right? She lies. End of story. But her dad lies too. So her dad actually, when he was being interrogated and all this stuff, it had came out that he was already talking about Jason possibly killing his first wife, Megs. The evidence in that case does not show this at all. But he claims that Megs's father, who was at the wedding, like I said, they're still there for the children and their, family for all intents and purposes. They didn't break up in a divorce. She passed away. And he claims that her father told him at the wedding, Tom, Molly's father, that he was suspicious that Jason did kill Megs, his first wife and mother of his children. And so the police asked the father, and he's like, I have never said that in my life. We know that she passed away from an asthma attack because not only was Jason there, but Megs' sister was also there with Jason when the ambulance had gotten there, because Jason had drove to meet the ambulance, so it was faster because she was in an active asthma attack, and it was ruled that it was an asthma attack. So there's no evidence stating that this is what could have took place, and there was even no kind of like domestic violence or anything in that relationship that was ever reported. And like I said, his sister and brother-in-law and all his whole family has never seen him aggressive. Molly was taping a lot of stuff that was going on in the house, but when you listen to the tapes, and this could only be me because I haven't seen many people talk about it, but to me, it sounds like she is antagonizing it in a certain way because she knows how to push his buttons already. And also using the children to affect him in a way that is an aggressive, she knows she's gonna get that aggression back from him when she does certain things at a certain time, because whenever she was recording, it was like right when the poor dude got off work. Like, really? You're being a brat while he's getting off work and he's trying to spend time with his children and enjoy his time, and you're just being a brat about it. Because she was sitting here asking for the whole will to be changed and custody to be changed for the kids, and he didn't want to do that. They weren't her kids. Like, I get he married her and he should be comfortable with doing that, but at the end of the day, if he didn't feel comfortable doing that, like, let it be. Like, you're in those kids' lives, that should be enough, but it wasn't enough for Molly. And that was the whole, in my opinion, and in a lot of other people's opinion, that was the whole motive behind this whole entire thing. Okay. Now, let's go back to let's talk about the story a little bit. Okay. So, Molly and Tom Martens, their story basically goes like this. Allegedly, Tom Martens and Molly's mother, I don't know what her name is, never caught it, but we'll get to her in a little bit because she's not completely innocent in this, in my opinion. So allegedly, they came into town a little bit later. They ordered pizza, they ate, and everybody went to go to bed, right? Well, I guess Tom heard screaming from Molly's bedroom, and he went up there to find allegedly Jason choking her, like holding her by the neck and choking her. And when he went to confront him, he moved his arm like to chokehold her, like with one arm. And so Tom Martens basically says that he was trying to get him off his daughter because he said that he was going to kill her, in a chokehold. Didn't have any other weapons, just in a chokehold, right? And so allegedly while he's holding his daughter, Tom hits him with a bat over the head. I don't know how he misses his daughter if he has him in the front. It's very weird, the story. There's a lot of holes in it. So anyways, he says he's hitting him with the bat, whatever. He starts to go down. Molly gets free. Molly grabs a brick from the side of her bed. She said she had a brick by the side of her bed because allegedly she was doing like a project with the kids and they were painting bricks outside, but yet it was inside upstairs. Like they don't have like a patio area, like it was upstairs. Very weird. Anyways, grabs a brick and starts hitting him with it. Now a lot of the blood splatter and things like that is lower to the ground on the wall. So it tells you that he was incapacitated and this was a complete overkill. Now with the autopsy, they could not determine the exact amount of blows because his skull was completely crushed. They did determine that the brick and the bat were the weapons that were used. And on the brick itself, there was even tissue found, which again suggests overkill. And again, Molly had the brick. Now, when the police arrived, Molly and Tom didn't have bruises. Like, they weren't bruised up. They didn't have scratches. It didn't seem like there was a big fight. Even in the house itself, when you look at the photos, and I'll give you guys resources in the show notes below to look at the photos of the home where this fight took place. If they were both fighting equally, like Jason with, these three people fighting, it would be far more messed up, holes in the wall, things like it would be crazy. And it's not. It's my opinion that I think that Molly attacked him in his sleep. There is evidence that there's blood underneath the sheets, which suggests that he was laying in bed at the time. And I think that her father either knew or heard what was going on and then went and assisted because, again, he's an ex-FBI agent, and she also knew that would help her in the long run too. So all that stuff combined with everything, they knew people would believe them regardless of their past of lying or regardless of them actually lying, right? Now, one big thing with the death is trazodone was found in Jason's system. Trazodone was not prescribed to Jason, but Molly was prescribed 15 milligrams a day. It was about the week before she had went to the urgent care for, I guess it was like an ankle or something, and she was having problems sleeping, so they prescribed that to her. So that's very interesting to notate too, because they also claim that Jason was drunk at the time and he had no alcohol in his system. We also go into the fact of the matter that there was time between them actually calling 911 and him dying, because like the medics that picked him up stated, he was cold to the touch. That takes a little bit of time. Like, it doesn't just happen out of nowhere. So if that incident had just happened when they had called 911 and they had arrived 10-15 minutes later, the body would still be warm, and it wasn't. So that's very telling too. They kind of got their story together. They had a little bit of time, which makes sense again because he's an ex-FBI agent. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Now, the things that Molly did after Jason was declared deceased were even more telling if you didn't have any other doubt in your mind. Now, 48 hours after his death, she emptied Jason's bank account and she paid for a deep cleaning of the house so she can later sell, because she ended up taking the kids and moving. Now, once the will was put into play, Jason's sister Tracy and her husband took the kids because it was per Jason's will that's what was going to happen. And so that's what they determined. Now, they did go to court for this. They did court thing, and the judge determined that they would go ahead and do what Jason wanted to be done with the children, because it was evident he hadn't made the effort to change it in any way, so other than to give his sister that authority. So I think they made a good decision, and the judge talks in some of these documentaries too, and it's really, really awesome. So I know we kind of went over what they served. In October of 2023, again, they skipped the trial. They took a plea deal of voluntary manslaughter, and they spent a few more months in jail. They ended up doing 4 years and 3 months, both of them, Tom and Molly. That's what they ended up doing. Now, the kids still are with Jason's sister Tracy in Ireland, and they want absolutely nothing to do with Molly. In this documentary, Molly talks about how the kids are brainwashed and how they're used for evil and all this other stuff, but the kids have said a lot of stuff, and even though they've went back, and one of the biggest parts in this trial is they've gone back and forth. So they've said this is what was happening, but then they said, oh no, actually this is what's happening. And I think that I do see, and I think a lot of other people have probably interviewed them and seen that they were, in the beginning, you can tell they were little kids. They were scared of Molly. This was somebody that was an authority figure to them, and I think that she may have even threatened them, like, and been like, hey, if you don't do this, like, I'm gonna take your dad away. Like, you don't know what these crazy bitches do nowadays, especially these ones that think that they need to be moms, but really, you're not a mom for a reason. Like, there's a reason behind it, okay? There's a reason why you're not a mom. But in this documentary, Molly and Tom both maintain their innocence, and they say that there was no evidence of anything other than domestic abuse, and it was self-defense, and that's just what it was. But the evidence that we see says a lot different, especially considering that there was no other evidence that supported what they said, you know? So there was a degree of overkill in this, and we do know that with overkill, that is something that we know is a crime of passion. So you can't say that this wasn't done in a crime of passion or even premeditated. I think that it could have been premeditated, but I don't think it was well sought out and planned premeditated, and I think it was something that maybe was presented, but her father wasn't fully through on it, but she just wanted it to be done. You know what I mean? That's how I feel. I've always felt that way about this case. So, regardless of what you believe, there's numerous questions that are still left unanswered. Was Molly a true victim or a manipulative killer? Did Tom act out of fear or fury? Was this about protecting children or keeping control of the children? And the most haunting question that I think we all have is, could this have been avoided by simply being an adult? Jason Corbett died trying to give his children a better life. His death left a hole that no courtroom, no conviction, and no documentary can ever fill. This case is a painful reminder that not every love story ends happily ever after. Sometimes love does turn toxic. Sometimes the lines between victim and perpetrator get blurred. And sometimes justice doesn't feel like justice at all. I want to thank you guys for listening to Blurred Lines. If today's story moved you, made you question the facts, or opened your eyes to a different perspective, I want to hear from you. Was this murder a tragic mistake? Did the legal system get it right? Or did it fail Jason Corbett and his family? Let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. I hope you guys have a good day. Bye. See you next time.